Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 9 stories coming out to just a little bit over 2 hours, just like we usually do. I hope you all enjoy it. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps out so much. Let's see if we can reach 1,300 likes on this video. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia, and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the US by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad, it's basically camping in a metal tent. Makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia to North Carolina border. So for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps. Most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there as opposed to being bathed in light, so I did my usual thing. Locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then a sharp tap woke me up. At first I thought I had heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes, a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree. Maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird was dropping something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes, of course. The keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still, I lay there completely still, pretending to be asleep. Pretending I hadn't heard anything. Hoping whoever it was, they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still, the tapping continued. I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making the noise. So that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through my entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone I presumed to be a woman was lying on my hood. Her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid, rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making in that instant the most beautiful sound I ever heard. For a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it. Right as I saw her approaching for the driver's side door with my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look. As I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway, there, I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light. Right now, I don't even know if this is the best course of action, but I feel that it's important to document what exactly has been happening at my house these past 2 weeks. I'm quite honestly terrified. However, I don't think I can go to the police or my friends with this information. My mom and I live in a simple 2-story house. Just the two of us. We always get along great and spend a decent amount of time together. But ever since I got back from my friend's party, she hasn't been the same. I got home pretty late, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. I pulled my car into the driveway and entered the house as quietly as possible so as to not disturb my mom while she was sleeping. I quietly snuck through the darkness of my house to the kitchen to get some water and snacks to take up to my room. When I entered the kitchen, I turned on the light and, to my surprise, my mother was already standing in the kitchen. She's looking out of the window over the sink into the dark expanse of our backyard. Startled as hell, I asked her, "Mom, why are you standing in the dark in the middle of the kitchen? And what are you looking at? It's a bit creepy." I tried to make some humor out of the situation, expecting another humorous remark to be made back at me, but she didn't respond. From where I was standing, I was unable to see her face as she was looking out of the window. It was hard to get a read of the situation and what exactly was going through her mind, so I speak up again and change the subject. "Well, the party was chill. I left kinda early since all the people I actually cared about left," I said as I grabbed what I needed from the fridge. Still a bit curious and worried about her, I asked, "Hey, are you okay?" She responds to me without taking her eyes off the yard. "Yes, okay." But the way she said it felt off. She said it in what seemed like an excited, cheery voice, like she was accepting an invitation or proposal from someone that really excited her. It felt completely inappropriate for the mood and setting we were in. It's hard to explain well. From all of the horror movies I've seen, I knew that approaching her was not really something I should do, and honestly at the time, her answer was good enough for me. I took my snacks and went up to my room immediately to sleep, leaving the lights in the kitchen on for her to finish whatever she was doing. The next morning I woke up to the smell of breakfast. This was normal, as she usually cooks breakfast for me on weekends, since she's in no rush to get to work. I come downstairs and greet her with a good morning as I pour myself some juice from the fridge and take a seat. She responds with a, "Good morning, sweetie." She seemed completely back to normal. I was relieved. I didn't know what happened last night. I didn't know if she was being emotional or if I was overanalyzing it. but I was ready to move past it. She turns around from the stove with an omelet and some potatoes and begins to plate my food. She asked me how the party was and if I slept well. I was going to mention that I already told her last night, but decided to just leave it. It was good. I left kinda early since all the people I actually cared about left. I replied with the same explanation as yesterday. I see. Well, I'm glad you didn't stay the whole night because then you wouldn't have made it for breakfast today. It seemed like she didn't notice that I gave her the same answer as the previous night. After a bit more chatter, we sit down together and begin to start eating breakfast. As I cut into my omelet and raise the fork to my mouth for the first bite, I noticed something strange about the piece I had cut. I looked closer and noticed something shiny with the slightly runny insides of the omelet. I took it out with my hand to see that it was a small sewing needle, small enough to where it would be almost completely undetectable until it was too late. My heart started to beat fast as I asked her, "Mom, what is this?" I hold the needle up and show her what I found in my food. This was inside my food. After seeing it, her face looked concerned. She immediately apologized and stressed to me over and over again about how she had no idea how it got inside of my omelet. "I'm so sorry. You know I would never knowingly do something to hurt you." She says to me as she gives me a hug, "Don't eat that anymore. I'll make you a whole new one." By that time, I had lost my appetite, but she was able to convince me that it truly was an accident. I honestly started to feel a little bad for even humoring the idea that she did it on purpose. It was just such a strange occurrence that I had to wonder if there was any malicious intent behind it. The rest of our day continued normally. We laughed a lot, watched some of our favorite movies, gossiped, and then ended our long day with our usual good night. I went to bed that night at around 10:30 p.m. I was a little kid. I was deathly afraid of the dark. So my mom bought 2 night lights and put one in my room and one in the hallway. Well, I don't use one in my bedroom anymore. We for some reason have always continued to leave one in the hallway. I guess we were just used to it being there, and never had a reason to not have it there. Later on in the night, I woke up thirsty and drank from the glass of water on my dresser next to my bed. In the process of doing so, I noticed something odd. Under my door, I could see the familiar glow of the nightlight. However, the glow was being partially covered by a shadow. I could tell that someone was standing right outside of my door. This was unnerving enough to make me do absolutely nothing but stare for 1 to 2 minutes. The shadow never shifted, not even slightly. After some time, I called out towards the door, "Mom?" Without hearing any response, I see the shadow begin to move slowly and quietly back towards the direction of my mother's room. The next morning, I came downstairs to breakfast again, slightly tired. After the shadow incident, I was unable to sleep well for the rest of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was constantly being watched. Immediately, I asked about it. "Mom, were you outside of my room last night? At like 3 a.m.? Ignoring my question, she says to me, "Remember when you were younger and you would let me brush out the curls in your hair? We should try that again. Come on." She beckons me towards the kitchen sink that was already slightly filled with water. I noticed some conditioner and a brush on the counter as well. At this point, I was reluctant. After weighing the evidence of what has happened to me since the night of the party, I think anyone would be reluctant, but somewhere in me, it felt ridiculous to imagine that my mom was suddenly an enemy. I figured that I was overreacting and decided to let her take care of my hair. I sat down, leaned back, and put my head over the sink, looking up at her and the ceiling as she began to condition and detangle all of the knots I had in my curly hair. I had forgotten how good it felt to have my hair maintained by someone. After about 25 minutes of conditioning and talking about random stuff to pass the time, she tells me it's time to finish up. I felt my hair and was surprised with how smooth and hydrated it felt. She began to rinse my hair with the spray nozzle of the sink. After rinsing most of it, she tells me to stand up and put my head face first into the sink so that she can finish the last bit of rinsing on the back of my head. We continued our conversation as she rinsed my hair, but while I was in the middle of talking, I felt a sudden, hard grip dig deep into my hair. Suddenly my head is thrusted into the water that filled the sink. I immediately began to panic. I was being drowned. You would be surprised how absolutely weak you feel in a situation like this. Your mind is in a state of panic while someone has their entire weight over you, holding you down by the back of your head. My arms alternated between flailing around and trying to push myself up using the edges of the kitchen counter. After what felt like ages, the grip released, and I instantly raised my head out from the water, coughing and trying to catch my breath. I turned around viciously and stared at my mother. "What the fuck are you doing?" I yelled, trying to regain my balance. She begins to laugh and point at me with one hand while the other slaps her knee over and over. "I got you. You should have seen your face." I stared in disbelief. My unhappy reaction was obvious enough for her to stop laughing and look at me with a concerned look. "Oh, sweetie, don't be such a bad sport. It was just a joke." She walked towards me with a hugging motion. I maneuvered myself away from her, backing up cautiously with the same cautious look on my face. I was scared of her. That was not my mother's kind of humor. My mom would never take a joke so far, not far enough to risk hurting me. This was the point I knew that something was wrong with her. That was the point where I wasn't even sure if that was my mom anymore. From that point on, I was distant. I would only talk to her when necessary. I started skipping breakfast and dinner while staying in my room more. The nights where she would stand outside of my door continued. It happened every night at around the same time. Every night, the shadow under my door would disappear after some time. I was on edge a lot more. I started leaving the house more often and staying at friends' houses when I could, as long as it meant that I could stop spending so much time in the same house as her. She stopped going to work. Instead, I would always see her out in the backyard during the day doing random things like digging holes, stabbing the grass with a trowel, or standing on the grass talking to herself, though I was never able to hear what she was saying. But what happened to me last night was something I'll never forget. Before going to sleep, I remember praying that I would be able to sleep through the night peacefully without waking up, as seeing her shadow from underneath the door always makes me deeply uncomfortable and scared. To my misfortune, when my eyes opened up to the darkness of my room, I realized that I had woken up in the middle of the night again. I slowly bring my eyes to the bottom of my door and see that she is there again, standing on the other side of my door silently. I lay my head back down and try extremely hard to sleep. But given the conditions, there was no chance that I was even close to sleeping again. But this time, I heard a knock on my door. 1, 2, 3. 3 soft, spaced out knocks. After that, it was dead silence. I laid there deeply terrified. Why was she knocking this time? Why now, after all this time? My mind was racing. Then a realization entered my mind that frightened me to the point where I was barely able to move. My door doesn't have a lock. Since I was a kid, it never had a lock. The only barrier left that prevented access to me didn't even have a lock. I heard the knocks again. 1, 2, 3. I immediately hid my head under my covers, returning to the child instincts that kept me safe from the monsters all those years ago. However, this time, I knew this wouldn't keep me safe. I heard the door slowly creak open. My eyes closed tightly shut as I hid under my blankets. I listened for footsteps entering my room, preparing myself for the worst. But there were no footsteps. Did she give up? Did she open the door and just leave? Is she still standing there now? All of these thoughts crossed my mind. Not knowing the answer was only scaring me even more. I laid under my blankets and listened. I listened for what felt like 5 minutes. The silence was immense. I had no idea what was happening or what my fate was. I continued to listen. Silence. Then I heard a flurry of pitter-patter. It was going inhumanly fast, and I could hear the sound of contact being made with the floor, and then the walls, and then the ceiling. It was all around my room. My heart sank. My eyes were closed so tightly shut that it physically hurt. Is she on all fours? Is she just running that fast on her feet? How is she going around my room like that? Is this where I die? These were the last thoughts I had before I lost consciousness. I don't know if it was induced by a panic attack or stress or what, but I do know that I'm mostly glad that it took me out at that moment. I woke up the next morning to everything in my room being knocked over and in disarray. It was nowhere in sight. Did it leave? Is it in the house still? I still do not know. After finally getting the courage to leave my bed, I was able to get a chair and prop it up against my door as I type this. I don't know who I should talk to or where I should go, but I do know that I will not be staying another night here. I haven't heard any noise from within my house since waking up. I'm posting this here because I have a feeling that this is the only place where people will believe what is happening to me. I'm going to take the chair off of the door and make a run for it. I still haven't heard anything outside of the door, so the coast seems clear. I will make it out of here, and I will never come back. My dad is obsessed with Google devices. And I mean obsessed. I grew up in a fairly small house. Sure, it was 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, but it was small enough that if you were talking to someone upstairs, you could usually hear them from downstairs. Unfortunately, the Google devices are no exception to this rule. There are so many Google devices in our home. If you say, "Hey Google," to the hub in the kitchen, the one in the living room will still pick it up. Before you know it, you're talking to 2 Googles simultaneously. And although it was funny for the first few times, it became quite annoying very quickly. My dad is so obsessed with the Google Home setup that he has wired Google to control our living room lights. And the lock on our door is also automated by a smartphone app. I have since moved away from my childhood home, so of course I don't have this app installed on my own phone. Now, every time I go home, I need to be accompanied by someone with the app to let me into the house, or else I'm forced to resort to knocking on the door to alert someone to let me in. However, I love my dad, and we've all accepted these minor annoyances as one of his quirks. I thought this quirky love of technology was harmless. Until now. I don't visit home often enough to download the app onto my phone, so I have no way of entering the house without the app. This week when I returned for a visit, I'd resigned myself to the tedious business of waiting for someone else to open the door for me every time I needed to enter our house. Matters were made even worse when my dad had his phone stolen earlier in the week, and my mom was the only one left with the app installed on her phone, effectively making her the gatekeeper to our house. Of course, my dad assured us that he had deactivated the app on his phone remotely when it had gone missing. Now I wish I hadn't taken his words for granted. It happened late in the night. I was sprawled in my bed, scrolling mindlessly and sleeping on my phone, when I heard something quite odd at around 1 in the morning. Clunk, clunk, clunk. It seemed to be coming from downstairs. Initially, I thought of my old dog Pepper. Great, I thought drowsily. She must be getting into the garbage again. It was only after the clunking noise commenced a second time that I fully woke up from my sleep-fogged brain and remembered that our dog had passed away about a year ago. I had been conditioned as a child to expect that every noise originating from downstairs in the middle of the night had come from our dog, but now that was impossible. Clunk, clunk, clunk. The noises were uniform in both length and volume, methodical, rigid, and unyielding. I strained against the silence for another minute, listening for the sound in the darkness of my room. I stared apprehensively into the inky blackness. My phone screen now blank and silent. Clunk, clunk, clunk. By now my heart was beating a little faster. I tried to rationalize the noise, running through options like, it must be the pipes, and raccoons fight outside our house all the time. But if I was being honest with myself, none of my rationalizations could truly explain the persistence of the noise. Clunk, clunk, clunk. There was a strange rhythm, an undeniable purpose that resonated from the relentless sound. There was no denying it any longer. This was coming from our side door. Someone, or something, was playing with the locking device. When I came to this realization, my breath caught in my throat, and my heart stuttered like a butterfly suddenly caught in a gust of cold wind. Someone was trying to get into our house. Someone who kept trying but couldn't understand that what they were doing wasn't working. That thought was somehow even more frightening than the alternative. This person was attempting the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. No sane or rational human would reach that conclusion after trying to get in so many times. And not only was this person attempting to break into our house at 1 a.m, they weren't going to give up anytime soon. And again, clunk, clunk, clunk. By now I knew that I had to take some sort of action. I am embarrassed to say that I did not feel comfortable leaving my room, so I resorted to using the technology I had on hand. My phone. Shakily, in my panic, I dialed my dad's number and waited for him to pick up. I took shallow breaths as I waited for the call to go through. When the phone started ringing from my end, I expected to hear it buzzing or ringing in my parents' room just down the hall. I had a brief and bizarre moment of amusement when I thought about the benefits of a smaller house with thin walls, and how this might come in handy for once. However, when I heard the phone finally ringing, my blood ran cold. I had completely forgotten my dad's phone had been stolen. The phone was ringing from outside the house, directly on the other side of the side door. There was a pause, and then the ringing stopped abruptly. I held my breath as I listened intently, my hands shaking as I held my own silent phone. Minutes seemed to pass. Clunk, clunk, click. I met Cyrus about a month back. Track season was just starting, and when we practiced, he would sit in the stands and watch. Sometimes I saw him reading, but he always had his headphones in. It wasn't uncommon for kids to sit and watch practice. Most of them were paying more attention to each other than to us. I only noticed Cyrus more than the others because I never saw him in class. He was clearly our age, and it was a big school, so I wasn't suspicious. It was just curious to me. One day when practice was over, I happened to be walking the same direction he was on my way home. We caught each other's glance and started a conversation. Or I did, rather. Hey man, I'm John. I see you at the track all the time, but I guess we've never had class together. Oh, I don't go here. I'm Cyrus. I'm homeschooled, but I get bored, so my parents let me hang out at the track after school. So far, nobody has said anything, so I didn't think it was a problem. I don't think it's a problem. Just wanted to say what's up. See if maybe you wanted to join the team. Thanks. I just like hanging out. Really. All good. You walk down Kirkland to get to home? 'Cause then we can walk together for a while. Sure. Our first conversation mostly continued like that. I was talking and he was responding with as little effort as possible. The next day, however, he was waiting for me so we could talk. That continued for as long as track season continued. We talked about all sorts of stuff. We told each other about our families. We talked about hockey and soccer. I told him about this girl I had a crush on, and he told me about his girlfriend he met at church. Every day we walked and talked until we got to Prospect Park, and then we'd go on our separate ways. He never wanted to come to my house to hang out after. He never invited me anywhere else. He didn't play video games or go to the movies. I figured maybe his family was on hard times. Maybe he was embarrassed about his house and he didn't have the money to do stuff I usually take for granted. As I thought about it, I realized he wore the same clothes all the time. A black hoodie, black jeans, and some torn up Converse. For our school, that was common because we wore uniforms, but there isn't a reason for a homeschool kid to do that. I started to feel bad for him. After track season was over, he'd still wait for me after school and we'd walk and talk. My friends asked about him, but he never hung out if I invited him to join the whole group. It was fine with me, I guess. My friends are kind of immature and shallow. Cyper was hyper intelligent and seemed wise for our age. One day I was talking to him about my crush for the third day in a row when the conversation took an interesting turn. I was pretty sure Liz wanted to go with me to prom, but then today Suzanne told me that Liz was gonna say yes to Zach Klein. Then Suzanne told me Liz really likes Zach and she wouldn't want to go with anybody else. I can't stop thinking about it, man. I didn't even know if they knew each other. I probably won't go now. Aren't some of your friends going without dates in a big group? You should go with them. It isn't about having people to go with. It's about not going with Liz. More than that, having to see her with that fucking chode Zach Klein. I can't believe this shit. Cyrus stayed quiet for a while and then he stopped walking. I might be able to help you out. Don't say you're gonna give me a makeover. Do you trust me? Sure. We're pretty good friends now. So even if I told you something crazy, like you're gonna laugh at first crazy, you'd at least consider it to help your problem? Whoa, boy. I'll consider anything almost at this point. Are we gonna Freaky Friday this bad boy? You're a looker for sure, but I'm not sure you're so much better looking than me that she'd immediately say yes. Kind of presumptuous on your part. Cyrus got frustrated. Forget it, man. Let's keep walking. Sorry, I'll stop. Tell me what you were gonna say. I have a powder. Dude, I'm not slipping anything into anybody's drink. That's fucked up. Oh, god damn it. It's a powder you take. You just need a picture of Liz. You take the drug before bed. You stare at her picture until you fall asleep. Then you'll have a dream about her. An amazing dream where she's in love with you and happy. Then when you wake up, it will all come true. Come on. I thought you actually had a plan. I'm serious. 100% serious. I could see in his eyes that he was serious about something, but people can be serious about making you look like an idiot. Dude, that's absolutely fucking nuts. You're gonna give some sleeping pill and then laugh at me tomorrow after school when I show up and Liz is still in love with super chode Zach Klein. Look, it's your loss. My dad, he's into some really out there shit. I know what it sounds like, but I've seen it work. Something about manifesting deep desires from your soul into the physical world. You wonder why I never invite you over? It's because every time my dad talks to my friends, they never come back. But I know he isn't just a bullshitter or a crazy person. The things he makes, they work. You would have to trust me. Jesus. Okay, I'll mix your magical mystery powder into my water, but if something happens to me, I'm gonna haunt your ass from the beyond. I can assure you that will not be a problem. I'm going to go home and get it from my dad, and I'll meet you right back here. I can just... No, just wait here, okay? My dad will be mad if he knows I gave it to a kid. Young love is a powerful thing, I guess. I'd done pot before with my friends and liked it, but this felt like really taking things to the next level. With that in mind, it also sounds way too ridiculous to be true, so I didn't really see the harm. Cyrus was my friend. Even if this was an elaborate prank, we'd still get some laughs out of it later. I waited at the park for about half an hour, and then he came back. He repeated the instructions and told me to talk to Liz tomorrow and see he wasn't lying. I smiled the whole time I took the bag. It looked like Nesquik, so I figured that's what it was. I walked home and went about my usual business until bedtime. I mixed up the powder into some water, pulled up a picture of me and Liz from her birthday dinner last month, and got to drinking. I did not drink Nesquik. The powder tasted like what I imagined the earth tastes like. There was some dirt in there for sure, but I tasted and smelled other stuff too. I would have stopped drinking, but I was already halfway through. Might as well just dive in there. When I was finished, I laughed. Cyrus, that old so-and-so, had just gotten me to drink a handful of some kind of soil by using my teenage desire against me. It was pretty funny. Till it wasn't. It only took about a minute for the room to start to spin. I had no choice but to lay down. I dropped the cup onto the floor and just managed to grab the picture of Liz and I and look at it before I passed out. Then the dream started. Wonderful, vivid dreams. Liz and I kissing under waterfalls and sleeping under the stars. Dreams of admiring her banter at work parties and meeting my parents. Cuddled up together in front of a fire. It felt like I lived a lifetime with her. I was overwhelmed with bliss. I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to leave her, but I did. My alarm went off to get up and ready for school, and I had tears in my eyes. I got ready as fast as humanly possible and practically ran to school. I sat by my locker. Liz's locker was in the same hall, and I waited with gargantuan anticipation. When she turned the corner, I nearly fainted. She walked right up to me and put her bag on the ground. "We need to talk," she said, leaning closer. I don't know what I was thinking. I can't believe that I said I'd go with Zach to prom even after Suzanne told me you were going to ask me. God damn it, Suzanne. No, it's okay. It's not okay. I don't know what I would have done if you went with someone else and I had to see you there. I would have been stuck with that chode while I could have been with you the whole time. John, I know you love me. I've known for a while, and I love you too. Of course I do. I just never realized how much. Do you want to go to prom with me? Holy fuck, Cyrus did it. He gave me the greatest gift a friend could give, and I had laughed at him when he told me. Liz just said she loved me. She asked me to go to prom. She called Zach Klein a chode, which he was, but still, it was nice to hear. The rest of the day was a blur. Every second we weren't in class, Liz and I were together. We held hands. We made out behind the Fine Arts building. We ate lunch without our friends. She was filling up all of my senses, but I couldn't wait to see Cyrus. I owed all of this to him. After Liz's parents had picked her up from school, I ran to the track to meet with him, but he wasn't there. I waited for about 30 minutes before I decided I needed to go home. I ran home. I blasted songs about brown-eyed girls and lifelong love. I fell asleep after being on the phone with Liz for hours. I woke up in the morning fully clothed. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I also didn't remember putting on these particular clothes. I didn't usually wear black, but especially not all black. And I didn't even own a pair of Converse, but there were some on my feet. My room was different. None of my stuff was on the walls. It looked like a spare bedroom. I couldn't find my phone. I couldn't find my wallet or my keys. I started to get scared. I ran downstairs to ask my mom what happened, but she wasn't there. I searched frantically, but nobody was home. And when I started to notice some stuff, all of the pictures of me were gone. From the wall, from the fridge, from the mantle over the fireplace. I started looking closer and then I saw it. I wasn't in any of my family photos either. Just my parents and my 2 siblings. There they were on the trip we took to Puerto Penasco. There they were at the Grand Canyon and at my grandparents' house in Santa Fe. But I wasn't in any of the pictures where I should have been. And in my place was Cyrus. My heart was leaping from my chest. My stomach was in a knot, sinking down inside of my body. Full-bodied, swelling fear raced to every inch of my being and swept my senses. I threw up. I fainted. I woke up and panicked all over again. Then I started to run. I had to get to the park. I had to get to Cyrus. When I got to the park, Cyrus was there. This is the first time I had seen him outside of that hoodie. He was in a Iron Maiden t-shirt and blue jeans. He was wearing a pair of Vans and a backwards black snapback. He didn't look at me. What the fuck is going on, dude? I'm freaking out. My room is gone. I'm not in any pictures. I can't find my phone. You gotta help me. I'm going to try to help you, but you have to listen to me. Let's go, dude. I'm freaking out. First, I want to say that I'm really fucking sorry. Don't be. Just help me get my shit. You need to listen. You aren't listening. The best possible thing for you to do right now is accept that your old life is gone. It doesn't belong to you anymore. My legs felt like they were going to give out from under me. What are you? Listen. His voice was loud. It almost didn't sound human. I was once just like you. I loved someone who never loved me back. I was desperate and sad. Felt like my life wouldn't continue without her. Then one day after school, I met a kid named Rory. I was gasping for air. I tried to pull out of the hoodie, but it was stuck on my body somehow. I was pacing back and forth, trying not to vomit again. We became close friends, and after a couple of months, he offered me a solution to my problem. It sounded ridiculous, but I was desperate, and so I went along with what he asked. The next day was the best of my life. Don't fucking do this, Cyrus. I swear to fucking God, I'll kill you right where you stand. You won't. You can't. That's part of the rules I'm about to lay out for you. You can never have your old life back. Never. But you can have someone else's life. All you have to do is get them to drink the powder in your pocket. Fuck. Fuck you. You piece of shit. I trusted you. You can't force them to do it. And you can't threaten them into doing it. They have to do it by their own will. I lunged at him, but I went through him like I was made of vapor. You have to go to another time. Only then will you manifest again physically. Nobody can hear or see you here. If you ever come back, you'll disappear again. Why? Why did you do this to me? Why not somebody else? We're friends. We are friends, which is why you trusted me. You'll have to befriend someone too. You'll have to feed off of their loneliness and desperation. You'll have to earn someone's trust and betray them like I've done. Until then, this is who, or what, you are. Those are your clothes. You don't have a home, nor are you allowed to have one. If you try to have one, you'll disappear. If it makes it any better, John, I'm so fucking sorry. I just couldn't be alone anymore. Good luck, and I'll never forget you, friend. Cyrus walked away while I was screaming. That was about an hour ago. Since then, I've started walking. I don't know where or why, but nobody on the street sees me or talks to me. I wanted to go see Liz, but I can't bear the thought of being erased from her mind. Hopefully, I'll find my way back to some kind of life. Wish me luck. My little sister had gotten a giant teddy bear for Christmas, but she didn't want it, so I thought I might as well add it to the numerous pillows that lined my bed. I'm a very creative person, so I named the bear Teddy. It was massive, about half of my height, and it had light gray fur that was softer than alpaca wool. It was a few weeks ago when I first noticed something strange with the stuffed bear. My imagination would often run wild, so I assumed that nothing was amiss. Despite that, I couldn't help but notice how Teddy would always seem to be looking at me, watching my every move. Whenever I worked on my desk, I would periodically glance at my bed to see his black, beady eyes staring into the deepest depths of my soul. Sometimes I would even stare back. Teddy's irises were deeper than a bottomless pit. It seemed like I could get lost by simply looking at them. Whenever something like this happened, I would turn the bear 180 degrees so that its back would face me. Then, I would glance backwards again. Eventually, while I wasn't looking, Teddy would turn around completely, sending chills down my spine. It couldn't have been gravity, nor could it have been the wind. Nobody else was in my room either. My first thought was that Teddy was alive, but that was absurd. This isn't Toy Story. Besides, Teddy was harmless. It was a little creepy that he was always looking at me, but he never made any hostile moves. Even if he did, he was literally a teddy bear. What's he gonna do? Strangle me with his fluffiness? I could probably drop kick him to the moon. As long as he didn't body anyone, there wasn't any point in doing anything. One night, I woke up to find that a few of my pillows had fallen off my bed. I reclaimed them, but Teddy was missing. Screw it, I thought. It was too much effort to turn on the lights, so I could just find him in the morning. It wasn't uncommon for my pillows to fall, and he probably just ended up somewhere I couldn't reach. And so, I drifted back into my peaceful slumber. Sure enough, Teddy was lying on the floor when I woke up in the morning. I let out a small giggle. There you are. And so the day passed by as usual. When I went to bed that night, I woke up at around 1 a.m. again. None of my pillows had fallen except for Teddy. This time I flicked my light switch and scanned my entire room, but he was nowhere to be found. What the heck? Where'd you go? I asked those two questions as if expecting a response from an inanimate object. With a sigh, I scratched my head and left my room to get a glass of water. My throat was drier than Death Valley. Before I could take a step into the kitchen, a muffled noise stopped me in my tracks. I sucked in a sharp breath that could have sliced my lungs if I weren't careful. After a few moments, the noise echoed again. It wasn't my overactive imagination. Naturally, I made the single most horrible decision that someone could make in a horror movie. I tiptoed toward the sound. Could you blame me? I was curious. Besides, chances were pretty low that a murderous monster was hiding in my house. I, for one, have never heard anybody encountering such a demon. Though now that I think about it, it might just be a survivorship bias. A dead person wouldn't be able to tell the tale of a murderous monster who broke into their house. It didn't take me long to discover what made the noise earlier. It was my little sister. Her carry-on red hair and green eyes were unmistakable, even in the darkness. She should have been asleep, but she was playing with Teddy in the living room. I must not have heard her thievish intrusion. Upon spotting me, my sister clutched Teddy in her stubby little arms and fled to her room. Go back to sleep, jeez. If you wanted Teddy so bad, you could have just asked. With a jaw-breaking yawn, I returned to my bed and got the rest of my shut-eye for the night. When my alarm woke me up, I felt as if gravity had tripled in the time I had been unconscious. Getting out of bed was usually the most difficult part of the day. I eventually dragged myself to the bathroom, where I emptied my bladder and splashed some water on my face. As much as I hated the frigid faucet, it did a good job of waking my mind. Hey, have you seen your sister? It came from my mom, who was standing outside my bathroom door. No, I replied. She was playing with Teddy in the middle of the night, but she ran back to her room when I saw her. What time was this? Maybe around 1 a.m. Why was she awake? I don't know. I just know that she stole Teddy and played with him for some reason. Weird. She's probably playing hide and seek or something. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. At that, my mom went back to searching. It's true that my sister had played these sorts of games before, but she was notorious for her terrible hiding places. She once tried to mimic a standing lamp by putting the shade over her head. The only good hiding spot she ever found was behind the curtains. Maybe she happened to have found somewhere impossible to uncover. Bernadetta, where are you? Bernadetta. My parents spent the entire morning trying to find my sister, but they came up empty-handed. It was the same thing with me. I couldn't find her anymore. It was almost as if she had vanished from thin air. When I checked my sister's room, I found Teddy staring at me once again. That cocky little bastard was mocking me, I swear. Understandably, my parents panicked. They didn't waste any time filling a missing person report. After all this effort spent searching, I was sure that my sister would reveal herself eventually, but that wasn't the case. She was gone. Because of the whole ordeal, I was late for school that day. No worries, though. I hadn't been tardy enough to warrant any consequences. When I drove back home, my sister was still gone. My parents hadn't heard any news either. Out of instinct, I grabbed a kitchen knife and stomped into my sister's room. Sure enough, Teddy was still there. I stabbed the cursed pile of Fluffy 60 times and chopped off his head, creating a mound of stuffing all over the bed. Then I took every last piece and shoved them into the trash bin outside. Tomorrow was trash pickup day, so the garbage truck would soon collect Teddy and incinerate him. Could you call my act of murder insane? Maybe. Who goes around stabbing teddy bears? Well, me, apparently. It was a stupid idea in hindsight, but I was thinking at the time, no matter what anybody tells me, I'm sure that bear had something to do with it. He did something to my sister. I know it. There was no way I was keeping that thing inside my house. By the time I went to bed, a persistent nagging had kept me from falling asleep. Even if I slipped into unconsciousness, I would be plagued by nothing but nightmares. Maybe insomnia was a blessing in disguise. Suddenly, someone knocked on my door. Who is it? I asked. No answer. Mom? Dad? They usually got home pretty late, so they were probably checking on me. Another knock. What do you guys want? Silence. Then a third knock. Sheesh. I muttered, taking off my covers. Then I froze. What if it wasn't my parents? But then, who could it be? They should be the only other people in the house. Unless... No, it couldn't have been Teddy. I chopped him into pieces. The garbage truck drivers were supposed to take him away the next morning. I retreated under my covers and waited. Damn my hyperactive imagination. This might just be a dream for all I know. I recalled some tricks to find out if you were dreaming or not. Number 1, count your fingers. I still had 5. Number 2, inflict pain onto yourself. I pinched my cheek and instantly felt the sting. I wasn't dreaming. This was reality. By now, the knocks had stopped. I peeked my head out from my blanket and monitored the door. The knob turned and my heart skipped a beat. The hinges wailed as the door swung open, revealing a diminutive figure. It lumbered into my room without a sound. Cowering under my sheets would do no good to protect myself. My best option was to fight, but still I couldn't move. Sheer terror had trapped me like a coffin. After a few moments, the figure hopped onto my bed. It was close enough that I could finally discern what it was. A stuffed bear. It was about a third of Teddy's size, and it had red fur that matched the shade of a bloodied corpse. Worst of all, it had strikingly familiar emerald eyes. That was when I noticed another shadow next to me. There he was, sitting as still as a cadaver. Teddy. He met my gaze and said, "Won't you play with us?" Tommy was what the beautiful people at our high school called an easy target. He was short, kind of chubby, very timid, with thick black Coke bottle glasses. Need I say more? Now, I've never considered myself to be a tough guy, but I could hold my own in a fight. 1-on-1 or even 2-on-1 if it came down to it. You see, my father, who at the time had just retired from the Air Force after 20 years, had taught me a few defensive moves when I was younger, in case I ever needed to defend myself. He also taught me to respect others and to stand up for what is right. And that is how I met Tommy. Tommy Wickerman. It was 1986. I was 17 years old and a senior in high school. Tommy was a junior, as he was a year younger. Now, like I said, my father had just retired, which meant we, my mother, my father, and I, could no longer live in base housing. The Mayflower Moving Company had a contract with the air base, according to my father, so they were called in to pack all of our belongings and move them from our old house in Andrews Air Force Base to our new house in this small country town. I'd tell you the name of it, but a lot of weird and creepy stuff happens here. It's not for the faint of heart. I wouldn't want any of you coming here and getting maimed or killed or anything like that, so it's best I keep it to myself. But I love it here. You never know what's going to happen. Anyway, that's not important. Now, after moving into our new house and getting the utilities turned on, the only thing left for my parents to do was enroll me in school, which they did. School started the following Monday. Monday came, I got up at 6, got dressed, had breakfast, then went outside to wait for the bus. I know what you're thinking. If you were 17, why didn't you just drive to school? Well, I didn't have a car. Now, I don't know how it was or is at your high school, but at this one, all the students either walked to school or took the bus. Driving to school was not allowed. Anyway, my dad was getting ready for his first day too. He got a job as a security guard at Cartwright Cinema, a movie theater in the next town over. Apparently they show movies all day long. He's now the theater manager. My mom didn't and still doesn't work. She was and still is a stay-at-home mom. Anyway, the bus picked me up around 7, making several other stops to pick up more kids, and finally arriving at the school about 20 minutes later. I found my homeroom, found my locker, made sure I knew how to open it, and then went to my first 4 classes. I talked to a couple kids, got my books, learned a few things, and then it was lunchtime. So there I was, my first day at my new school, in the cafeteria with no idea where to go. I had just left the kitchen area with my tray, which had about 5 undercooked french fries, a pint-sized carton of chocolate milk, and a rectangular slice of that cardboard pizza that they used to serve in school. You remember that pizza, right? Well, it was the 80s, so some of you weren't even born yet. Anyway, this was the best pizza ever, am I right? Those of you remember it, that is. Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa John's. Ain't got nothing on that 80s high school cardboard pizza. Elio's comes close, but it's not the same. Sorry about that. Back to the story. Now, like I said, I just left the kitchen area holding my tray and looking out into the sea of tables, all packed with kids that I didn't know. I was an outsider, an unknown, and man, did I feel like it. The sounds of multiple conversations filled the air. Anyway, I just stood there slowly looking left and right. After a few seconds, I decided to start on the right side of the cafeteria. I walked up the aisle looking for an empty seat. I passed the second table on my right, and there it was, on the far side of the next table, an open seat on the aisle. I walked to the table, sat my tray on it, introduced myself, and sat down. The kids all greeted me with heys and highs, and went back to their conversations. I opened my milk and was just about to take a bite of that amazing pizza when I heard a cocky, arrogant voice from behind me say, Tommy, still sleeps with Mommy." I remember it like it was yesterday. The entire cafeteria then grew silent. I turned around, and that is when I first saw Butch. Butch Matheson. He was about my age, about my height, with blonde hair, wearing a letterman's jacket, tossing a football in the air and catching it, repeating the same preschoolish rhyme over and over again. Obviously, he was the quarterback of the high school football team. Anyway, he walked up the aisle and stopped at the kid that was sitting right to back with me. Tommy. Now, one would think that by the age of 17, that Butch's mental capabilities would have come up with something better than Tommy still sleeps with Mommy, but let's just say, Butch was not the brightest light on the tree, if you get what I'm saying. Anyway, he stopped in front of where Tommy was sitting. All the kids at my table grabbed their trays and left. It was at that point I knew that Butch was the school bully. I just sat there looking at him. Butch then rustled Tommy's hair, smirking as he did. "Oops," Butch said loudly as he slammed the football down on Tommy's slice of pizza. "Look what you did to my football," Butch yelled, picking it up and shoving it in Tommy's face, sauce and cheese dripping from it. Tommy turned his head quickly in my direction to try and stop the ball from hitting him in the face, his glasses sliding off and falling to the floor. Our eyes met, and I saw nothing but fear in his eyes. As the ball hit his right cheek, Tommy closed his eyes, and I saw a tear form in the corner of his left one. Enough was enough at that point. I stood up, catching Butch off guard, grabbed the football with my right hand out of Butch's hand, and with every ounce of my strength I had, threw it directly in his face, knocking him back and breaking his nose. The ball bouncing under the table. A wave of shocked profanity then filled the air. I looked to see all eyes turned in my direction. Several girls covered their mouths with their hands, while several guys were throwing fists in the air and wolfing like Arsenio Hall did on his talk show years later. I turned back around to see blood gushing out of Butch's nose like a water faucet. "Leave him alone," I screamed as Butch grabbed his face. Two other kids came to Butch's aid. One took a step towards me. "You want some?" I said aggressively and took a step toward him. He stopped, turned around, and went back to helping Butch. Teachers and other faculty members then came rushing to break up the fight, and to quiet down the kids. Now you have to remember that this was in the 80s, long before you got arrested for fighting in school. Back then, you took your hits and moved on. Butch was escorted to the nurse's office, while I was escorted to the principal's office. Before I left, I bent over, picked up Tommy's glasses and handed them back to him. "Thank you," he said, wiping off his face with a look of shock in his eyes. I just smiled at him and nodded my head. I got 4 days of ISS, which stands for in-school suspension, in case you didn't know. Basically, you still had to come to school, go to homeroom, get marked as present, then report to this little room, about the size of a walk-in closet, and sit there all day until the school day was over, staring at the walls with other kids that got in trouble, not talking to anyone, not doing anything but just sitting there. We did have lunch, but it was this stew-like concoction that looked like baby vomit. It smelled and tasted even worse. There wasn't even a clock in the room, so you couldn't tell what time it was. Now I know what you're thinking. I would just look at my cell phone to know what time it was. It was the 80s, remember? Cell phones weren't invented yet. The person in charge of overseeing the troublemakers was always Mr. Donnelly. I'm not sure if he was a teacher or not, or they just hired him for that purpose, but he definitely was a throwback from the 70s. He had long, stringy brown hair, pulled back in a ponytail, wore bell-bottom jeans, sandals on his feet, a tan button-up shirt with what looked to be a dark blue crocheted vest with a huge peace sign on the back, with little round buttons on the front. He wore round wireframe glasses like John Lennon wore, and always smelled like potting soil. Anyway, it was horrible. All because they said that I was the aggressor in the situation. Butch didn't get in trouble at all. All he got was a broken nose. High school quarterback, remember? Anyway, I told my father what happened. He had a few choice words for the principal, but in the end, I served my time and moved on. Friday, after my last ISS, I was walking to the bus when Tommy came running up from behind me. We started talking and became really good friends. Now, I'm not going to say that Tommy was weird or strange or anything like that. I'll just say that his hobbies were different than most people's. Where my hobbies included listening to music, 80s hair metal to be exact, going roller skating and watching movies, Tommy's were, as I said, different. You see, Tommy's father was the local taxidermist. You know, the people that stuff animals, real ones, after hunters kill them for no apparent reason other than just to kill them, and mount their heads to the wall or put the whole thing on display. Anyway, he taught Tommy how to stuff them. His entire room was full of mounted dead animals. Birds, mice, a raccoon, a couple squirrels, and even a cat. It was so disgusting, but he wasn't my friend, and who am I to judge anyone? We hung out at my house a lot. Anyway, no one really cares about that. Moving on. Butch did not learn from our altercation, and continued to bully Tommy every chance he got when I wasn't around, that is. We got in multiple fights with each other because of it. I spent more days in ISS than I did in the classroom. He just wouldn't stop. Now, on that faithful Friday afternoon, Tommy had asked me if I would be his friend forever, no matter what. Without thinking, I replied, "Yes, of course I will." Now, answering that question the way I did many years ago has begun to make me question myself, whether I can keep that promise or not. I am torn by the decision that only I can make right now, but more on that later. Now, like I said, Butch was a never-ending torment for Tommy, well, until his senior year. You see, Butch and I were in the same graduating class, and Tommy was a year behind us. So Tommy's senior year was relatively torment-free, at least in school, that is. I kept in touch with him after I graduated. Now, during the homecoming game, our senior year, only a month or so after the lunchroom incident, Butch had suffered a career-ending injury to his knee, and was forced to give up football. I never want to see anyone get hurt, but I wasn't too torn up about it either. Now, being forced to quit football only made Butch's torment of Tommy even worse. Shoving him into lockers, pulling his pants down in the hallway, hip checking him into walls, things like that. Now, since Butch was no longer an asset to the school, he actually began to get in trouble. He got a couple ISS's, but that didn't stop him. After graduation, Butch took over management of one of his father's video rental stores and continued to mess with Tommy. At the mall, at the roller rink, at the movies, every chance he got. Tommy told me what happened each time, but wouldn't let me address it with Butch. He said he had a plan, but wouldn't tell me what it was. I'd see Butch from time to time when I came to rent a movie. He was always nice to me. I got a job in the shoe department at Wally World, a department store in the next town over, just down the street from where my father works. Saved my money and bought a car. I've been there ever since. Shortly after Tommy graduated, he said that being in this town only reminded him all of the torment he suffered at the hands of Butch, and that he needed to get away and start a new life somewhere else. I understood completely. He packed his bags and took the next bus to anywhere that wasn't here. I gave him money for a ticket, a couple $100 to get him started, and drove him to the bus station. He promised to pay me back. Tommy never learned how to drive. He was completely scared shitless to get behind the wheel of a car. Anyway, as he got out of the car, he turned to me, smiled, and said, "Tell Butch I will never forget him. Thanks for being my friend, Mike. I'll call you. Bye." It was at that time I noticed something different about his eyes. They weren't as innocent looking as they were when I first met him. They were darker. "Okay, I'll tell him." "You're welcome, man. Be safe." "Bye, Tommy," I replied, waving. He waved back and walked into the terminal. I then drove home. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks turned to months, Tommy's call never came. During that time, I had saved enough money from my job to move out of my parents' house and rent a room at the local flop house. I asked my parents to let me know if Tommy called. They said they would. Now, it was 1988 at that point, and life carried on without Tommy. I missed my friend, but without knowing where he was, I couldn't contact him. So after a while, I figured he went somewhere, started a new life, and was happy where he was at. He did start a new life, and I'm sure it made him happy, but how it turned out was not how I thought it would be. Anyway, like I said, life went on without Tommy. I worked my way up to assistant manager of shoes after about 15 years. I'm a very patient man. I got a good size raise and moved out of the flop house into my own apartment. I met an incredibly beautiful woman at work a few years later. She's a cashier there. We started dating and were married about 2 years after that. She moved in with me. It was about that time that I started to notice missing person flyers everywhere I went. The creepy grocery store in town, the gas station, the zoo, even stapled to trees lining the streets. Everywhere. There was a new flyer every 6 months or so, and they were all people I went to school with. Stacy Bennett, the head cheerleader. Scott White, a member of the wrestling team. Devin Williams, the class clown. Richard Garrison, Amanda Moffat, and even Mr. Fleming, the physical education teacher. After the third disappearance, town officials elected to place a 10 o'clock curfew on the town, and all businesses were ordered to close at 9. If you worked out of town and worked later than the curfew, you had to register with the police department, provide your work schedule each week, also the make, model, and license plate number of your car. Then you would get an exemption card from the sheriff. I still have my card, as sometimes I had to work until 11. Now, even with the curfew in place, people just kept disappearing for the next 10 years, give or take. I just figured they all got tired of the craziness that happens in this town, moved away, and didn't tell anyone. But when I saw the flyer of the latest person to disappear, I knew I was wrong. The missing person was Butch. And just like that, the disappearances stopped. After a year went by, and with no further disappearances, the sheriff lifted the curfew and life went back to normal. Which brings us to present day. Well, almost. I arrived home from work about a month ago, and my wife handed me a plain white envelope with my name on it. She said she found it sitting in the mailbox when she checked the mail earlier. It had no return address, no postage stamp, no stamp from the post office, nothing. Nothing but my name, and only my first name. I was reluctant to open it. I mean, wouldn't you? Anyway, I sat down on the couch and stared at the envelope for a good 10 minutes. Finally, I decided to open it. Inside was a letter, neatly typed. I still have it in my wallet. Hold on, I'll read it for you. Here it is. Dear Mike, I hope this letter finds you well. A lot of things have happened since the last time we talked. Such wonderful things. I have found purpose in my life. I'm not afraid anymore. I am sorry for not contacting you sooner, but I have been busy perfecting my calling in life. I hope you understand. I would like to share my accomplishments with you, my one and only real friend. I invite you to my home at... address retracted for privacy. At your earliest convenience, please contact me at 1-555-728-3825. It would be great to hear from you. Your friend forever, Tommy. I sat there on the couch completely shocked yet intrigued. How did he know where I lived? Was my first thought. My second thought was, since he obviously didn't mail it, who put it in my mailbox? My wife then walked into the room and sat a cup of coffee on the table for me. She then sat next to me and asked, "Is everything alright, hon?" "I'm not sure," I replied, slightly puzzled. It's from an old high school friend that I haven't seen in about 30 years. I almost forgot about him. He invited me to his house. "That's nice. Probably just wants to catch up. You should go," she said, smiling. "I'll think about it." I responded, then threw the letter and the envelope on the coffee table, took a drink of coffee, and spent quality time with my wife for the rest of the night. Sat there for 3 weeks, at which time curiosity got the better of me. My wife was at work and there wasn't anything good on TV. I sat the remote on the coffee table, next to the envelope and the letter. I stared at it for a few seconds, then picked it up. I unfolded it, found the spot where the phone number, got up off the couch, walked to the kitchen to the phone on the wall, picked up the receiver and dialed the number. It only rang once. Tommy then picked up the phone. "Hello," he said. His voice was more intense than I remembered, but it was his voice. "Hey Tommy, it's Mike," I replied. We then had about an hour-long conversation about almost everything under the sun. He said he found my address by Googling my name. It wasn't hard to find me because I have a very unique last name. He also said he had taken the bus back to town and walked to my house, and that he had every intention on stopping by, but there was no car in the driveway, so he figured I wasn't home. He wrote the letter in case no one was home when he got there. So he left it in the mailbox, walked back to the bus station, and took the next bus home. He didn't know I was married. Anyway, once we got our schedule to coincide, we made plans to meet up at his house. The following Sunday, my next day off. I googled his address and found out he lived 3.5 hours away. After making our plans, we said our goodbyes and hung up the phone. When my wife, her name's Casey by the way, got home from work, I told her about talking to Tommy and the plans we made for Sunday. She was happy for me. This morning came, it's Sunday by the way, got up around 7, got dressed like usual, had breakfast with Casey, made a travel mug of coffee, kissed Casey goodbye, got in the car at about 8, and made the 3.5-hour drive to Tommy's house. Well, the little over 4-hour drive. with traffic and bathroom breaks. Coffee runs right through me. Anyway, I arrived at Tommy's house just after 12 o'clock. It was a huge 2-story house, bigger than mine. It was forest green and trimmed in white, with a porch that stretched across the entire front of the house. There was a white picket fence that surrounded the whole property, which was about 2 acres in size, with a large gray sign that read, "Wickerman Taxidermy Services" on it. I knew I was at the right place. There was a decent-sized garden to the left of the house as you look at it, with tomatoes, cucumbers, and various other vegetables. There was a large building behind the garden, painted the same colors, about the size of a 3-car garage, with stepping stones leading from its entrance to the back of the house, assuming to the back door. The driveway was to the right of the house, leading to the side of it. I pulled in the driveway, shut off the car, and got out. I walked up the sidewalk onto the porch, rang the doorbell, stepped back, and waited. After a few seconds, the front door opened up and the man I saw standing before me was short, and was wearing black glasses. But he was not chubby at all. He was a lot thinner, and very muscular. He reminded me of Taz when he was in ECW. Anyway, "Tommy," I said, shocked at what I saw. "Yeah, man, it's me," he replied, stepping back, spreading his arms out, and spinning around. He stopped to face me again. "Come on in, my friend," he said, and motioned for me to enter. So I did. The first thing he did was hand me a white envelope from his back pocket with $1,000 cash in it, paying me back that loan I gave him all those years ago. I put the envelope in my back pocket. We then sat at his dining room table for the next 4 hours, drinking coffee and reminiscing about old times. Come to find out, shortly after he arrived here and stepped off the bus, he rented a room off an elderly lady with some of the money that I gave him, and became good friends with her, given the fact that she had no living relatives when she passed away about a year later. She left him the house and the property in her will. Once the money ran out, he got a job as a hoser, working at the local sanitation company. You know, the guys that suck the crap, literally, out of septic tanks and porta potties. He said it was a real shitty job, pun intended, but it paid good. Anyway, he worked there for a couple years until the tragic death of his parents in a freak accident that happened on Christmas Eve at that creepy grocery store back in the town I live in. He sold his parents' house but kept all his father's taxidermy equipment and opened up his own business. And that business is going good, especially around hunting season. Anyway, he said that when he first met the old lady, she noticed his size and offered to help him lose weight, as she was a dietitian at the local health and wellness center for many years, and helped many people lose weight and keep it off. He took her up on her offer, completely changed his eating habits. He eats a lot of salads, soups, and fish now, lost about 100 pounds, and started working out. He had a Bowflex machine set up in the upstairs bedrooms. He let me try it out. That thing was nice. I'm gonna look into getting one myself. After my workout, I was quite hungry. Tommy mentioned to me that he was having salad for dinner and offered me one. I love salads. Anyway, I grow my own vegetables in the garden, he stated. Cool, I replied. The salad was amazing. Now, after dinner, we talked for a while. It was starting to get dark, so I mentioned that I had to get going. I didn't want to get home too late. He agreed and started to walk me to the door. "Oh shit," he exclaimed. "My accomplishments. I forgot to show you." I figured, how long could it take? 10 minutes or so? "I got time," I said. Tommy then smiled. "Come on," he said, turning around and walking towards the back door. He opened the door and we walked to the large building in the backyard. Now, I was in no way, shape, or form prepared for what I saw. Tommy put his hand on the knob. "Now, close your eyes. I want it to be a surprise. I'll guide you in," he said excitedly. So I did. Now in complete darkness, I heard the doorknob turn. I heard the door open and felt Tommy grab my arm. "Step, step, step. Okay, stop," he instructed. "Are you ready?" He asked excitedly once again. "Sure am," I replied. I then felt, with my eyes still closed, an overhead light turn on. "Okay, my friend, open your eyes," Tommy said. So I did, but I wish I didn't. You see, what I saw when I opened my eyes completely terrified me and sickened me at the same time. In the room was nothing but plaques and 3 old rusty dog cages lined with soiled newspaper and handcuffs hanging from the tops of them. Now I know what you're thinking. Plaques? What's so terrifying about plaques? The cages are a little creepy, but the plaques? Well, it wasn't the plaques that were terrifying. No. It was what was on the plaques that terrified me. It was human heads. A lot of them. Neatly preserved with their eyes open and looking at me. I recognized some of them. They were the missing people that I went to school with. Stacy, Scott, Devin, Richard, Amanda, Mr. Fleming, and Butch. Others I did not recognize. "Ain't it awesome, Mike?" Tommy asked, nearly shitting himself with excitement. I just stood there afraid to say anything. "Mike, you okay?" he asked. Now, knowing what happened to the missing people, and knowing that Tommy kidnapped them, tortured them, and eventually killed them, led me to only one conclusion. If I didn't play along, Tommy could easily do the same to me. "Yeah, man, this is amazing. I love it," I replied as if nothing was wrong. "I got 'em, Mike. I got all of them," he said with a wicked smile, walking over to the heads, pointing to each one and explaining why. Stacy, who laughed in my face when I asked her to a school dance. Scott, who almost broke my arm in gym class one day showing off for the girls. Devin, who always pulled pranks on me. Richard, who used to spit spitballs at me in class. Amanda, who called me names. Mr. Fleming, who insulted me, causing the whole gym class to laugh at me because I couldn't even do one pull-up. And my prize accomplishment, little Butch, who cried like a baby right before I ripped his head off. "You know what that little fucker used to do to me, Mike." He then turned to look at me. "No one is gonna fuck with me ever again." He screamed aggressively. I just looked at him. Who are the other people?" I asked. "Oh, they're just some asshats that fucked with me when I first got here. Don't worry about them," he said calmly. In case you're wondering how I keep the heads looking so good, I use my skills as a taxidermist. All my equipment is set up in the basement of the house. I bury the bodies in the garden at night so no one sees me. It's a good way to fertilize the vegetable plants. I suddenly felt that salad come creeping up in my throat. I fought like hell to hold back the vomit and composed myself. "Hey man, this is great. I'm glad for you. You finally got revenge," I said. "I'll have to stop by again and see if there's any more additions. But I really gotta go, man." "Okay, cool," he said, opening the door, shutting off the light, and shutting the door. After we walked down, he walked me to the front door, opened it, and shook my hand. I practically ran to my car and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I got about a half-mile from the house, pulled over on the side of the road, puked my brains out, wiped my mouth off, cleaned my hands with some sandy wipes that I keep in the glove box, and drove on. Now, remember that decision I mentioned earlier? The one that only I can make? Well, it's time to make it. You see, I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of the local police station, staring at the front entrance right now, contemplating what to do. I've been here for about 2 hours. Tommy's words keep echoing in my head over and over again. Will you be my friend forever? Ever, no matter what. Followed by my reply, yes, of course I will. I don't know what to do. I mean, I do not agree with the way Tommy handled things, and I do not agree that the people who tormented him, laughed at him, or made fun of him deserve to be tortured and killed either. But every action does have a reaction. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad. And in this case, it's really bad. What you say or do to someone will have an effect on that person's psyche. They should have known that. People need to realize that. Screw it. What are friends for? I'm going home. We were on a little traveled road when we drove past it. My parents doubted a hotel would be good miles away from towns. I ensured they knew I was tired, so soon my complaining made them tired too. The hotel we were at seemed like a Hilton or a Motel 6 you'd find. Everything was freshly vacuumed. The lobby looked like it came straight out of the Four Seasons, although the only person there was the receptionist. It slipped by me at the time, but in retrospect, it sticks out to me. Why would such a nice hotel have no other customers? When we walked into our third floor room, I realized I had never seen a room so clean. I was 10 that night. The foster care system never found my birth certificate, so they think my real age is unknown. My mom, dad, and I were tired from the leg of our road trip we had embarked upon that day. I was swimming in the pool while my parents watched. I was doing somersaults underwater and splashing around, while my mom and dad discussed their plans for the next day. Wanting their attention, I turned to my parents and shouted, "Thanks for taking me down here." My dad, glad to hear me say anything besides a complaint, responded, "You're welcome, Jack." My dad left after mentioning a work project or something urgent he needed to get done. I decided to see how long I could hold my breath. After my lungs started to scream for air, I gave up. My mom started to chastise me for this, saying, "You shouldn't do that, Jack. You could." She was distracted by the sounds of my father shouting and running towards us, followed by an ear-splitting shriek. After he entered the pool room, he told my mom to take me and run. He would distract them while we ran to our room. The exits were already blocked by them. My mother was shocked. Finally, she stammered, "What? What are you talking about?" As far as I can remember, this is the only time I ever heard my dad yell. He shouted, "Go, take Jack and run to the room, now." My mom ran to grab me. She pulled me out of the pool, soaking wet, and my dad began to run down the hallway, screaming as loud as he could. I reached out for my towel, thinking about drying myself for some reason. I didn't move as she carried me into the hallway, because I was still trying to wrap my mind around the situation. It was then that I saw them. There were 3 in the hallway chasing my dad. They looked human-like, but they were hairless and their arms stretched down to the floor, dragging as they walked. Their legs were short, yet they moved as fast as my dad. They wore no clothes, yet shadows prevented them from flashing us. And their hands were the strangest part. They were long, at least a foot in length, and curled like fish hooks. I knew they were sharp intuitively. Despite the fact they were made of skin, they chased my father down the hallway as my mother ran with me in the opposite direction. I reached out for my father, grasping for any hope that he might come back to us. My hope was futile. One of the creatures shrieked, shattering light bulbs and glass windows all around us. My mother dropped me, instinctually covering her ears. As she picked me back up, I saw dozens more of the creatures rush towards my father. A few ran by me and my mom, and I did nothing but stare in horror as my view of my dad was blocked by them. My mom picked me up, and we sprinted to a stairwell. It was dimly lit, as many of their lights were shattered by the shrieking. She sprinted up the first and second flights of stairs. Suddenly, she stopped. She saw it, but it didn't see us. I noticed that this monster's eyes were cloudy, and I wondered if that was the case for all of them. It was short, maybe 3 feet, and its fingers looked sharp and hungry for our blood. My mom gingerly set me down, placed our room's key card in my palm, and closed my hand around it. She leaned towards me and cupped her hands around my ear. She said as quietly as she could, "You're going to have to run to our room and get in there by yourself. It's room 304, the second one on the right. Don't wait for me." Just as she finished that sentence, she turned and charged at the creature. I dashed towards the room without looking back. As I ran by, I felt something sharp catch my shoulder, and it began to feel like it was on fire. I made it to the door, unlocked it, and made it inside. As I turned around to close the door, I took one last glance at my mother. She was determined to stop the creature from shrieking. Her arms wrapped around it, and she pulled its face into her stomach. I saw crimson blood on the back of her shirt. I knew she would have a hard time getting the stain out. Hope bubbled up inside me, and I waited to see her kill it and run into our room. She would make everything right. I knew she would. Then I heard its shrieks. I ducked and covered my ears. Once I looked up, I saw more creatures running down the hallway. I closed the door to our room and collapsed. I tried to sob as quietly as possible and moved as little as possible. One small noise could end my life. Then I fell asleep. Time blurred together for the next couple of days. Fear and the pain in my shoulder kept me from getting much sleep. Sometimes, hunger or thirst drove me to risk opening a bag of Chex Mix or raiding the mini bar for a water bottle. I made it at least a few days without attracting their attention, suppressing the pain of my parents' death. All my grief overwhelmed me eventually, like lava exploding out of a volcano. I cried out, "Mama!" At once, I realized my mistake. A large number of footsteps came thundering my way. I heard a clawing at my door that grew louder and louder. Desperate for any escape, I frantically looked around the room. The window. Yes, the window was the only way. I made a mad dash to the window and began trying to open the lock. A monster's hand broke through the doorway. I couldn't reach high enough to open the window, so I moved the bed close enough. I opened the window just as the creatures broke through the door. The monsters that rushed towards me looked like water in a wave. There must have been 10 to 20 of them trying to get through the doorway simultaneously. I took one look at the ground below me and the screen in front of me, and I jumped. As I was falling, I flailed my limbs wildly. I hit the ground. I tried to run towards the road, but I couldn't move. Then I looked at my legs. I passed out the moment I saw how twisted they were. I woke up in a hospital. When the nurse realized I was awake, they called a policeman in to talk to me. He explained that a passerby had picked me up and brought me here, and asked me what had happened to me. I told him the whole story, including the monsters, my parents' fate, and how I jumped out a third-story window. He had sympathetic eyes when I told the story, but he turned and asked the nurse what drugs I was on. He then asked me what my name was and where my parents were. I said my name is Jack Dawson. The monsters got my parents in the hotel. Do you think you could go look for them?" He responded calmly, "Jack, there isn't a hotel on that road, but we'll see if we can find your parents." I was too tired to tell him he was wrong. I felt a warm, calming feeling come over me and I went back to sleep. As I healed over the next few weeks, I was told that no records existed of me or my parents. They checked for missing child reports and asked me if I was sure I was told them the right name. But eventually it became clear that no record of me or my parents existed. I argued with them constantly. After a few years, I had to give up. My parents were already dead, so there was no use in fighting with the system. My life turned out pretty okay. I bounced around foster care for a while and did my fair share of vandalism during my teen years. I graduated high school somehow and decided to become serious about my life. I became an electrician, got married, and had 2 beautiful daughters. That night hangs in the back of my mind like a cobweb you can't quite reach. I want to go back to that road and show everyone the hotel is real. I can't do anything about it because I can't put my daughters through the same horrors I went through. I had parents despite what everyone says. Everyone knew I had them until that night. Dallas sat on a wooden stool nursing his 3 fingers of whiskey. The ice in the drink had long since melted away, leaving only a swirling golden mixture. He gripped the glass, hoping some of the leftover moisture would soothe the cracks in his dry hands. The whiskey in was just for show. He didn't drink on the job. The bar was low lit with amber lights that reflected the dark wood paneling. Colorful bottles of spirits filled the shelves. Old country music emanated from the 1950s style radio at the end of the bar. The holes in the radio's fabric and scratches on its dial would make you believe that it had been involved in some of the fights it had watched over the years. Regardless, it still sung its old school country tunes. This place had the same routine that all the other underground holes Dallas had been to. A dive bar smelling of dirt and cheap booze. The day shift workers would come in to shoot the shit until they had to go home to their wife or girlfriend, leaving only drifters and drunks to sit in miserable silence, or wanting to start a fight. Dallas was waiting for that last part, the part where he could light a cigarette in the corner and get out of his seat. Dallas looked down to his chest pocket to remind himself of the Marlboro Blues. 5 cigarettes left. 1 was needed for leaving. That was a tip his grandfather had taught him. He could hear him in the back of his head now. You always have to leave in a cloud of smoke. They can't track you that way. It'll leave them gasping for air. That left 4 cigarettes to be enjoyed at his leisure. Dallas lit one up and the lighter's flame revealed his face. He wasn't handsome by Hollywood standards, but he had chiseled enough features. The bones in his cheeks were high and his jaw was defined by a 2-day stubble. Dallas's milky blue eyes reflected the smoldering tip of the cigarette, and the smoke ran over his thin 6-foot frame. His jeans had holes in the knees. Dallas's brown denim jacket was kept together by hasty sewing jobs, and the yellow button-up shirt below was wrinkled. 2 men at the far end of the bar started getting in each other's faces and raising their voices. Dallas noticed it and tilted his gaze over to them. A tall, skinny man and a short, muscular man. The tall man pushed the short man and he fell backwards, crashing into a few bar stools. Dallas placed a mental bet on the shorter man, not because he was muscular, but because the short man was significantly shorter than average. Probably had to fight tall guys like this all his life. The tall man laughed as he pushed the short man back down before he could get back up. This was the kind of fight Dallas came to these bars to watch. Sure, he got sucked into a few occasionally, but that was the price of admission. The show of violence was better than any song a musician could sing. The short man finally scrambled to his feet and took up a basic boxing stance. The tall man mocked the short man, mimicking his seriousness of the fight. He slapped at the short man and made fun of the way the short man protected his head. Dallas relished the thought of the tall man being drunk on his own ego. This was the easiest kind of guy to take down. Guys like the tall man had always won by overwhelming odds. Something in them gave them no thought of failure. No idea in their mind that death or serious harm was even a possibility. The tall man launched a fist into the short man's head, and the short man tilted his head downward. The tall man's fist hit the top of the short man's head and recoiled back. The shot hurt the tall man's hand much more than the short man's neck. Regardless, the skin still split on the short man's head, and blood ran down his buzz cut. A group formed around the conflict and started shouting at the men to fight. The pain in the tall man's hand sobered him, and he stopped laughing. Dallas had seen this 1,000 times before in 100 other bars. Always winning by natural gifts alone never gave people the experience needed to fight a stronger opponent. They never had to count the odds or outthink their opponents instead of overpowering them. It made them easy pickings for guys like Dallas, guys that had ways to bend the rules to their favor. The problem was that bending rules was difficult. It took time and familiarity. By the time you knew how to bend the rules, it might be too late. You'll be chasing your tail by then, and having to figure out ways to cover your losses. The short man threw a jab at the tall man's stomach to no visible effect. The tall man launched his open-handed shove into the short man's face, breaking the shorter man's nose. The short man's head rocked back. The short man stepped back into the bar, rocking Dallas's drink. He pressed a thumb into his nose and blew out the clumped blood and snot onto the wooden floor. His scalp was leaking blood down his face, and the skin around the cut was pulled outwards now. The face of the short man was looser now, like he was older and with wrinkles suddenly. Wrinkles was the wrong word only a moment later, as the structure of his face changed into a perverted masquerade of a man. His brow line was pushed downward into a hard V. The backs of his ears became pointed towards the ceiling. The vampire looked back to the tall man with protruding fangs in his mouth and blood-red eyes. The tall man stood with a confident smile. Dallas finished his first cigarette and moved on to the second. The man next to him started to cough. The vampire got close to the tall man and ducked a hook from the tall man. He stomped down on the tall man's foot. The tall man's foot let out a sickening crunch, and he yelled out in pain. The tall man swung up with an uppercut that gnashed the vampire's teeth together and split his gums. The vampire stumbled back and spit out a loose tooth from his now bright red mouth. He licked the blood off his gums in a hungry fervor. The tall man knelt down over his injured foot. He planted his hands into the ground hard enough to feel the vibration through Dallas's worn boots. The sounds of the tall man's bones breaking and reforming timed to the rhythm of the radio's song. His fingernails shot out across the floor as Paws replaced his hands. The tall man's clothes tightened around the wolf, taking his place, falling to shreds to reveal the growing mass of black fur and thick muscle underneath. The wolf's snout grew out of the tall man's face to reveal a row of bright white teeth dripping with saliva. The wolf let out a low growl and crouched low to the ground. Dallas blew out more smoke and was creating quite a cloud around himself now. He crushed his second cigarette and lit a third. The men around him had moved away. The bartender glared at him from across the room. He approached Dallas and motioned to Dallas's hand. "Hey, buddy, you need to put that out." The bartender's pointed ears and fangs were starting to show. The wolf lunged. The vampire reacted late and fell on his back with the wolf on top of him. Snapping jaws and teeth flashed in his face. Dallas continued to smoke like a train, puff after puff. The men around him were wheezing and falling off their chairs. The other patrons around the bar were taking their attention away from the fights and turning it towards Dallas now. Pointed ears and black fur starting to appear among them. "You hear me, asshole?" The bartender sputtered between wheezing coughs as he backed away from Dallas. "Put that shit out." Dallas blew more smoke into the crowd at the bar. They backed away, coughing and waving the smoke away. The duo fighting on the ground were both doubled over in coughing fits now. "Can you believe people used to think garlic and silver would scare y'all?" Dallas said, tossing his third cigarette and lighting his fourth. A vampire made a mad dash after Dallas and almost reached him when Dallas exhaled a cloud of fresh smoke in its face. The vampire collapsed to the ground instantly and began clawing at its chest, desperately trying to get burning air out of his lungs. Sanctified tobacco grown in the Pope's personal garden. I gotta say, this works almost as good as Granddaddy's crossbow. Wouldn't y'all say? Dallas said with a smile as he exhaled more holy smoke. The bar's crowd made for the door. A few of them stumbled behind and fell down kicking and screaming. A few of them stopped moving entirely. Dallas looked around the now empty room before tucking his lit cigarette behind his ear, its warmth and smell spreading across his face. He lifted himself over the bar in one motion. The bartender was looking at him from the ground, shaking and coughing, his blood-red eyes glaring in hatred at Dallas's standing figure. Dallas walked towards him and knelt down. He got close to the bartender and spoke in his usual soft South Texas drawl. "I ran into a fella up in Tennessee that told me the big man himself is down here in Georgia." "I don't know shit," the bartender said between breaths. "The fella in Tennessee said that too." Dallas pulled a silver cross from around his chest. The bartender on the ground hissed and bore his fangs. "How about now? Hickory stump. He's in a hickory stump." Dallas put the silver cross back under his shirt. He stood up and grabbed a top-shelf spirit before meeting the bar at his hips. Body-sized piles of ash now littered the floor in front of him. He pulled a road map out of his coat pocket with hasty notes and drawings scrawled on it. Dallas studied it, trying to find Hickory Stump. He grunted and patted his chest pocket, pulling out a pair of reading glasses. "Hey, is Hickory Stump in Irwin or Turner County?" The bartender wheezing slowed in response. "I guess it doesn't really matter, huh?" Dallas muttering to himself, not taking his eyes off the map. The bartender sat up, his coughing becoming less. "You think actual hickory grows in Hickory Stump? Seems like a weird name for a town." Dallas put the map back in his pocket, then rooted through the cash register, stuffing his pockets with loose bills and a mixture of change. He looked up to the gleaming bottles and pulled a bottle of tequila off the top shelf. The bartender leaned against the wooden counter of the bar, his voice returning from his formerly scorched throat. "You're so fucked. What are you gonna do, boy? Smoke 'em out?" Dallas put his reading glasses away and ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair, reaching for the dying butt of cigarette, tucked behind his ear. "No, but I'll figure out a way to bend the rules." The rage in the bartender's eyes turned to begging terror as Dallas put the cigarette in his mouth once again. All he could do is watch as the sanctified tobacco burned away in front of Dallas Van Helsing's wide, toothy smile. My name is Kat, and I'm a collector. I collect mostly stories of people experiencing the unusual. It's been a busy few years. The following was copied from a letter I received by post a couple months back. No return address, just my name scribbled messing on the front of a yellowed envelope. I've had to change a couple of names and scrub the name of the hospital, but here it is. There's kind of a lot to unpack here, so I should probably start at the beginning. I know I shouldn't share this with a perfect stranger, but it may become important in the future. So I'll tell you I'm a 16-year-old female. I don't have much life experience, which also means I haven't had all that many work opportunities. That being said, around 2 months ago, I got my first job. I've been working at a local hospital in my town, specifically in... I mostly organize files and whatnot. Not overly exciting, maybe, but it pays. It's much better than jobs some of my friends have, anyway. My best friend has told me horror stories from her job in fast food. I work a night shift, 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., which can be a little rough. Luckily, it's summer and I don't need sleep for school right now. The thing is, there's some weird crap that happens after midnight around here. When I first started, some other night shifters warned me that there may be some strange things happening and just to ignore them if they do. I've actually experienced a few of these events and they scared the absolute pants off me. The first ones I had was someone we affectionately call Chainsaw Guy. Calling him that makes him sound a little like the antagonist of a slasher film, but it's really more of a description. So the first time I encountered him was actually only my second day without supervision. I was putting some old files in order when I caught something passing by the door out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head to see if it was my night shift supervisor, but I didn't recognize the man I saw. I knew he couldn't be cleaning staff since he wasn't wearing the hideous uniform. I may have forgotten to mention this, but the building I work in is actually across the street from the actual hospital where the patients stay. This made it highly unlikely that he was a lost patient. I actually wanted to ignore him since it's not my job to deal with intruders, but I also didn't want to be blamed for the loss of destruction of hospital property. I went to the doorway and said, in as polite a tone I could muster at 1 a.m. on a Wednesday, "Hey, you can't be here." He didn't even turn around. He only muttered, "Jameson, Walter, 9, 18, 21, chainsaw accident." Then he repeated it. He just continued mumbling and I had to raise my voice to be heard. "You need to leave. This area is employees only." His mantra halted suddenly as he came to a jerking stop in the middle of the hallway. He turned around to face me slowly and I realized with a start that his shirt was soaked in blood. Then I saw his face and forgot all about his shirt. His face, if it can even be described that way, was a mess of bloody flesh and muscle dangling grotesquely from his skull, with one eye missing from its socket. I stared in screamless shock for a couple of seconds before a shriek forced its way from my throat. He shook his mangled head in apparent pain and bolted into the next open door. When I recovered from the initial shock, I realized that he was terribly injured and needed immediate medical attention. So I braced myself and followed him into the room, but he was gone, vanished into thin air. No one ever came to even check on me. The next night, I asked my shift manager about it. "Ah, yeah," he said, taking a drag on his cigarette. "Just ignore him." He was absolutely zero help, so I instead asked another woman on my shift. This used to be the ER. My coworker, who wished to remain anonymous, said quietly. Before they expanded, I was a receptionist at that time. One night, a man was carried in by a group of what I assume were his friends. Seemed to barely have a face left. He died in the hallway on the way to surgery. The very hall you work in. "Did he say anything before he died?" I asked, morbidly curious. "Yeah. He kept repeating the same thing over and over. Eventually we figured out that he was trying to tell us his name, birth date, and how he got so terribly injured. He was saying, 'Jameson Walter, 9/18/71, chainsaw accident.'" I finished. I've seen him a couple of times since then. and ignored him like my supervisor told me to. Old Walter ignores me right back, but he's not the one I worry about. That's an entirely different story, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to tell it now. Or ever. Please don't tell anyone I told you about this place. My story doesn't seem like much, but I get the feeling I was supposed to keep my mouth shut. I'll be sending you another letter once I get up the nerve. There's more you should know. I'm a little more worried that I won't survive this job. The letter ends here. The last 2 paragraphs are much shakier than the rest, with weird smudges like the writer had been crying. I've waited since then for a second letter, but received nothing. I worry about the girl who wrote this letter. I think that soon I'll have to take a visit to that hospital.